Evening, depending upon where you are. I'm Brinton Likes and co-director of the Center for Human Rights and International Justice, along with Dan Canstrom, who you also see on the screen, and working with Bonnie Waldron and Tim Kars. We're delighted to welcome you to our annual final end of the year event, in which we have an opportunity not only to present certificates to those of you who have been working with the Center for Human Rights and International Justice during your studies here at BC, but also to hear from a number of researchers and students who have been doing research supported by the Center for Human Rights and International Justice. Just a reminder, we have two presenters today. Unfortunately, the third one, Lindsay Hildebrand, was unable to be with us. She's a PhD candidate in psychology at the Morrissey School of Arts and Sciences. And her project focused on closing the gender gap in STEM, beliefs and attitudes across the lifespan. She's had a family emergency and so cannot be with us today, but we will upload her, what would have been her presentation, to the YouTube site. We're delighted, however, to have two presenters, each of whom will speak for approximately 12 minutes. And you may submit your questions for our presenters at any time during their presentation by typing them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom. If you'd like to be identified, leave your name in there. If not, change it. We'll be starting with Alicia Nguyen, a PhD candidate in curriculum and instruction at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development, and the 2020 Kelsey Renenbaum Fellow. Alicia's presentation is entitled Disruptive Storytime, Teaching for Social Justice with Anti-Bias Picture Books, some of which you will see on the screen behind her. She is also focusing her scholarship at the intersections of language, power, race, class, and gender in early childhood and elementary school contexts. Her expertise includes early childhood education, anti-bias and anti-racist education, bilingualism, critical literacy, and critical family engagement. Alicia conducts participatory and collaborative research with children and families with diverse linguistic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Prior to coming to Boston College, she received a bachelor's degree in English literature with minors in linguistics and multilingual studies, and a master's in curriculum and instruction. Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you, Professor Light. It is such an honor to be here today. And first of all, I would like to thank the Center of Human Rights and International Justice for funding my research project and for organizing this event. So should I share my screen? Can you all see it now? Mm-hmm. Perfect. So before I share the findings of my project, I would like us to closely examine this vignette from a school playground. This is also a research site where I worked, and I'm going to read it for you. During recess, two 5-year-old girls, Mia and Zoe, went to the playground and raced to the swing set together. Giggling and enjoying the cool breeze of the spring, Mia and Zoe tried to swing in sync and went as high as they could. Suddenly, Pete, a male classmate, came and pushed Zoe off the swing. "That is not nice." Mia helped Zoe get up and said angrily to Pete. "Mia, you should not play with Zoe anymore," Pete said firmly. "Why?" Confused and surprised, Mia asked Pete. And he said, "Because you are white and Zoe is not." So I would like to make a note about the children's racialized identities here. Zoe is Black, Mia is Asian, and Pete is white. And this incident happened in a white space, in a white predominant school, in a white predominant neighborhood. And Zoe is one of the very few students from the MEDCO program who got bused into this school. And we need to make very clear that such incident is not an isolated event, because many scholars, who study early childhood education spaces have documented and confirmed that it happens more frequently in white spaces where anti-Blackness discourse is circulated and reinforced. and children of color often racialized and suffer from racial discrimination and oppression. But as you can imagine, it is very, very difficult to talk about race, talk about racism, gender, class, sexuality, because early childhood is a very contested space. You know how we usually see children as racially unconscious, as asexual, and most of the time they were perceived as cognitively incapable of understanding these complex matters. And that is one of the many reasons that we have early childhood teachers and parents often avoid touching on these issues because they try to protect childhood innocence. But the problem about using that discourse is that childhood innocence, from my perspective, is it is a racialized and it is a gender concept. It is sometimes, if you think about it, it is white exclusive in a sense that only white children are allowed to be innocent. And it is strongly related to, the idea of idealized white femininity, childlike, innocent, and dependent. The two children of color, childhood innocence is not presumed. This is not something that children of color get to enjoy. It is considered a privilege in itself. Because we have the criminalization of Black boys, adultification of Black girls in the US classrooms. And to justify, dehumanizing treatments against Black children, the white logic affirms that Black children are less innocent, hence they should receive less protection and do not, they don't deserve the same level of tolerance compared to white children. And across educational settings from early childhood to elementary on way, K to 12 levels, Black and brown children suffer tremendously from racial discrimination, harsh discipline practices, and microaggressions. So childhood innocence is a burden, but it's also a contested privilege that needs to be debunked so we can reclaim the child right to engage into, discussion and participation of social justice issues and access to important knowledge. With that perspective, I conducted an ethnographic case study in a kindergarten classroom. And the classroom was located in the same school district that I mentioned in the vignette that I shared in the beginning of my presentation. I collaborated with an early childhood teacher, and she is a white female heterosexual teacher, to implement an anti-bias read aloud curriculum. And this classroom case was selected because it represented a typical early childhood classroom where read alouds is part of their morning routine. It is something that they're doing every day. And another reason is that the teacher that I work with is a very well-known and well-loved teacher in the community. She has been in the profession for more than 20 years, has a lot of experiences, and she has gained trust from both the families and the administrators. So it's, in a way, it's a strategic move because it's easier for her to engage in this kind of project without justifying it with many parties. But also similar to other early childhood teachers, she adopted a colorblind approach, and her classroom practices sometimes touch on the issues of diversity and kindness, but she did not explicitly talk about race and racism. So I would like to share with you one of the discussion that we have with the children in the classroom when we talk about the book Race Cars. So in this book, it is about two friends, Black and white cars, who enter the race together. They're best friends, very supportive of each other. But the Black cars, you can imagine, face a lot of challenges and discrimination during the race. And the first racist act happens when the white car committee adds a sign that say white cars only to prevent the Black car from crossing the bridge and winning the race. And most of the children, when we read the story to them, they immediately recognized that this situation was completely unfair to the black car. And then many of the children, drew an immediate connection between the black and the white cars and the black and white people, even though the teacher did not explicitly mention this. But you can see that, the student and Nancy said, when people don't like other people from other races, sometimes they put signs or they put tapes or they put little nets so they can't cross. And if there's no way to get, to the other side, then other race cars will get to win. And you can see that the children know that there are other potential racist acts and they are motivated by hatred and discrimination. And when we have Valentina, when she said they might put something like a wall so that the black car, can't go. So when we have Valentina said this, and I need to make a note that she's the only Latina kid in this classroom. When she said something about a wall, the teacher was really surprised, but she did not know how to respond to this. And then when I had a discussion with the teacher after the reading session, she said that I feel like it was too political, the wall and immigration and stuff like that. I don't think that I should talk to the kids about it, and I don't know how to carry the conversation further. I don't know how, if I carry the conversation further into that direction, I don't know what else gonna comes up. So another interesting thing about the project is that even though I introduced many anti-bias books to the teacher, I think only 20% of the titles pass the classroom doors, because somehow she tried to avoid titles that explicitly presenting the topics of racism, bigotry, and transphobia. She labeled them as not developmentally appropriate, too heavy, too difficult, or as you can see in the sticker that she put in one of the book for me, I'm not comfortable with this title. But so it's very interesting to learn that towards the end of the project, when we had another kind of interview, the teacher said that I'm really surprised. I think my children can offer a lot of insightful comments on the issues, and they can listen to these stories, they can interact with the books, and it proves wrong her assumption and underestimation of the kids' capacity to handle the stories. So I think it's important to see that the early childhood teachers, more and similar to all the other early childhood teachers, they are gatekeepers, right? And then they have the power to include what they want to teach, but also to exclude what they do not want to teach, right? To determine what to teach, what to read, and then what to discuss. So it's not just about the books, but it's also about what kind of questions are posed during the reading. And if the children, say something, would the teacher decided to, encourage that kind of conversation or shut it down? So there's many factors that comes into play, about how we talk about these issues with children. And if you think about this book that I have on the slides right here, Something Happened in Our Town. This is a book that did not make it into the reading program. I would encourage you to pick up this book or, buy it from the library and read it, because it is about police brutality and racial violence against Black people. It is written in a language that is suitable for you to talk about this issue with young children. But because that, and I also want to remind you that when I did this project, it was before summer 2020, right? Everything was extremely difficult. And I had to purposely call the project an anti-bias project just to pass the classroom gate and then see, if the teacher is willing to work on the books and talk about these issues with the children. But after summer 2020, we know that most of the school districts and many of the superintendents and principals sent out messages that trying to confirm their stance, the anti-racist stance, and says that we would commit to doing this work, and we will appoint, directors of inclusion and then diversity in our space. We will offer more training for the teachers, but nobody is interested in doing the work with the children themselves. Nobody wants to make any changes to curriculum and instruction. And that is what I want to stress, that it's extremely important for us to do that, to think about, the real work, not just the performative efforts of, proving your anti-racist stance. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so very much, Alicia. We now have a few more minutes for questions. I don't see any in the Q&A, so I'm going to start with one. Alicia, if you could clarify for us, who actually controls the curriculum in early childhood? Is it the teachers themselves, or are the school boards or other institutional pressures on teachers to perform in one way or another?
I think in elementary classroom, especially in the levels where you do not have to, where the kids haven't been, need to be prepared for the MCAS, the state test. Then the teacher have more freedom to choose what to teach, the materials and the curriculum, as long as, especially in terms of picture book, they can make that decision. But I can also remember that when I did my project, the teacher had to prepare many of the kids for assessment, like midterm assessment or the year assessment, and that certainly interfere with, her freedom, like to choose what to teach. But I guess for early childhood grades, early childhood levels, preschool up until third grade, the teacher has a lot of freedom compared to teachers from other grades, to pick what they want to teach, as long as it's aligned with the state standards.
Thank you. And Jane Walsh thanks you very much for your presentation and says, as a pediatric provider, she sees this as an important issue and wonders if pediatric healthcare settings can be an entry point for your work. Because she says they have a program called Reach Out and Read.
I think it's a wonderful idea, because I think the next step for the project is actually to have the families on board with us, right? When I did this project, I did it in an early childhood classroom, and most of the families were really supportive. They supported the project, but we did engage the parents, which I think is a very important step to make, that we need to, send the books home, send the discussion questions home, and then have a discussion session or information session with the parents, and so they can have that discussion with their children at home as well, right?
Right. I also would just, I was in a meeting earlier today with someone working in Texas, and they work with civics education. And right now the legislature in Texas is debating a proposition which would prevent anybody who teaches civics from telling the story of any events in the United States as if they have to do with one race oppressing another race, or one race marginalizing another race. So they're talking about legislating prohibitions in teaching in elementary and high schools in Texas and in numbers of other states. So it points out the critical importance of this work for human rights in the United States as we move forward in some of the many areas of work. So we deeply appreciate your study, and thank you very much for your contribution to working with parents and with children when they're young, and are often very open to these issues, as your study demonstrates. Thank you. And now we're going to switch to a second presentation. Thank you, Carlos Andrade Guzman, for joining us. We're delighted to see you. Carlos is a PhD candidate in the School of Social Work, and he will be talking about his experiences of work with informal women caregivers of people with disabilities in Chile, challenges for social policies based on human rights and justice. Carlos is completing his work while he's also teaching at the Jesuit University in Chile, Universidad Alberto Hurtado. His research interests include care work, childhood and disability interventions, and social work practice. He teaches social policies and qualitative, quantitative, and mixed research methods to both undergraduate and graduate students in Chile. He has presented this research in a variety of conferences in Chile and abroad and published it in academic journals. We look forward to hearing from you, Carlos. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to share the screen and well, you can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So, well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for attending this session. Well, as Professor Likes told us, I'm going to present this research that I conduct the last year. Yeah, experience of informal women caregivers of people with disabilities in Chile, challenges for social policies based on human rights and social justice. Well, as a background, we know, but research has told us that care work has been traditionally developed by women. And this is not the exception in the case of Chile. Actually, at the intersection between disability and care, in Chile, 74% of the caregivers of adult receivers with disabilities are female. Uh, from them, 94% are informal and unpaid caregivers providing care mostly to a relative, a son, a daughter, parents, among others. Also, research has told us that women caregivers would be more likely to be in unequal situations to exercise their human rights or live in situations of social injustice. And well, that care is also connected with different negative implications on income, mental and physical health, among others, phenomena like social isolation, among others. Well, the literature review that we conduct before starting the primary data collection process told us that while care is connected to gender, mainly women are providing care, and in Chile this is not the exception. Well, as I told you, women caregivers would be more likely to be in unequal situations to exercise their human rights or live in situations of social injustice. They are more prone to living with lower incomes or live definitely in poverty. Being engaged in caring would be more would have more mental and physical health implications for women caregivers. And also, caring for others would put women caregivers frequently in social isolation situations. Well, based on this, we conduct this research from a critical position in terms of a paradigmatic position. We understand care as a human rights. We understand that caregivers are subjects of human rights. And in this context, the state is the first guarantor of human rights. And based on that, it needs to provide the conditions for exerting the care as a right. The research questions in this study were mainly four: how women caregivers describe their care experience, what are the reasons behind the decision or need for caregiving, what are the implications of caring for people with disabilities for caregivers, and what are the challenges for social policy and intervention from a human rights and social justice perspective. All of these questions based on the perspectives of the caregivers. Regarding research designs and methods, this was a qualitative designs. The level of inquiry was exploratory descriptive. The data collection process was conducted with semi-structured interviews, and the analysis technique was the thematic analysis. The sampling design was a proposal sampling by criteria. These were be an informal female caregiver of a care receiver with disabilities, be greater than or equal to 18 years old, be That is my son, sorry. Be the primary caregiver. He's my primary caregiver. Care receiver, care receiver. Be the primary caregiver of a person with disabilities and be in the primary caregiver role for at least 3 months before the interview.
Children are always welcome at our events, by the way, so you can bring him in if you want to. It's okay with us.
Okay. Tadeo, do you want to come? Well, thank for letting me know. Well, the semi-structural interview guide was built on 4 foci. First of all, the way in which women caregivers describe and relate their care experience with gender, human rights, and social justice issues, the reasons behind the decision or need for caregiving, the implications that the decision or need of caring has in terms of incomes and labor inclusion, physical and mental health, and social isolation for them, and the challenges for social policies of care based on human rights and social justice from their experience. Well, at the beginning, we proposed a study with 12 caregivers. At the end, we interview 14 caregivers from different regions of Chile. The region in which more caregivers participate was Valparaíso, then the metropolitan region where is Santiago, and then other ones, as you can see in the table. Regarding the results, how women informal caregivers describe their care experience, our first questions. Well, mainly the experience of care for these women would be overall an experience of love and affect. Then they relate 3 issues on the base of this expression of love. The idea of family, a family in a traditional way, they mean, the life trajectory of both the caregiver and the care receiver, and the social structures and its mistreatment to both the subject involved, to both subjects involved in the care arrangements, the care receivers and the caregiver. The care experience and it's related with gender, human rights, and social justice issues. Well, for women, for participants, structural elements and being a women are mainly connected, and in concrete terms, regarding incomes, women earn less than that men in jobs, and because of that, it is the rational decisions in terms that they assume the care of the receiver, the role, again, the role in terms of that women would be more prepared to provide the care to others. A human rights depth in Chile regarding care arrangements, and the social injustice present in society who put over the shoulders of women this burden of providing care as the mainly provider, and sometimes the unique provider. Uh, what are the reasons behind the decision or need for caregivers? Well, first of all, women refer to caregiver sometimes like a situation that find us. You know, it is like they told us, well, I didn't have so much time to prepare myself to providing care. You know, it was like, yeah, we need to assume this, and and well, then when they start to think of the reasons behind in terms of a rational reflection, they again mention the structural conditions and the lack of resources. The structural conditions, again, in terms of it would be more convenient for families that women assume the care because women earn less in jobs regarding their husbands, as for example. And also, there is a structural lack of resources to support women in providing care. At the micro level, well, they should take the role of care regarding their husband, for example. What are the implications of caring for people with disabilities? Well, regarding incomes and jobs, well, they need, when they assume the care of others, they earn less or um, definitely they lost any income, putting subsides aside. Also, an implication for them has been put aside, put in a standby and in a long in standby. Sometimes their job projects, their professions, what they wanted to do for their lives before they had the need to care to others. Most of caregivers mention that providing care to a person with disabilities has consequences in their physical and mental health, anguish, depression, physical pain, among others. And also, regarding social isolation, we found mixed experience because research, literature review told us that most of the time caregivers find themselves with a lack of network support in emotional terms. In this case, we found mixed experience. Family and friends, the traditional ones, before, for example, they had a son with disabilities, some of those friends or those members of their family, it was like they became to be absent in their lives. But on the other side, they found in other women with sons, with daughters with disabilities, a new social network support, mostly in emotional terms. So we found mixed experience in this case. What are the challenges for social policy and interventions? Well, for them, there is the need of a recognition, the care from a human rights perspective, caregiver and the receivers as subjects of rights. Also, they mentioned that care needs to be recognized as a job itself, because, well, we know that without care, the productive system would be fall, So, because of that, they mentioned care needs to be recognized as a job, but but as a work with dignification, with conditions of dignity in terms of salaries, in terms of social security, among others. Regarding mental and physical health intervention, they mentioned that the Chilean system needs to provide health, but with high standards of quality. This means that in the case of Chile, well, most of the caregivers interviewed use the public system of health. And this public system of health is very different to the private one in terms of provisions, in terms of quality of health services. So they mentioned we need not only have we need not only have the provision of the social security of the social system once a month or twice at the semester, sometimes for a therapist appointment. We need in the frequency that we need. If we need to have I don't know, therapy for once a week, we need that. And that is not provided right now by the public system. And also regarding medication if it is needed, among others. And also they mention the need of they can count with the respite caregiver when they need. Regarding conclusions, well, policies and care interventions based on human rights and human justice must necessarily recognize and actively address the needs of both actors involved in the arrangements, the caregivers and receivers with disability. Today, actually, based on our last weekend, Chile has opened a window of opportunity with the constitutional process that we're facing right now. So actually, one of the this research was strongly supported with a gatekeeper, Mariela Cerey. Mariela Cerey is the president in Chile of an association named I Care, Yo Cuido, and she is one of the selected person to write the new constitution right now in Chile. Well, civil society can play a significant role in advocating and monitoring state and private actions in order to generate better conditions for exercising the rights of care. Interdisciplinary interventions should put at the center the need of both the receiver and the women caregivers. But we need to be all the time aware that the recognition itself is not enough. Uh, However, without this recognition, we won't be able to move forward to more inclusive societies and with effective conditions for the exercise of human rights. Well, I wanted to thank to the Center of Human Rights and International Justice for supporting this research. And well, all the thanks to my son and my wife, my parents, the caregivers and the study, Javier Reyes, my friend, Margaret Lombe, Maria Fernanda Piñeros, and Yo Cuido Association. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I'm not seeing a question in the chat. I was going to start, but I'll defer to Daniel and let him start, and then I'll come after him.
Okay.
Thank you. I find this research really interesting. I have one basic question, and maybe I missed it at the beginning. Were you primarily researching people who were caregivers within extended families who were caring for their own relatives, or were you talking about people outside of that setting who were hired to care for others? Because it seems to me that they're both very important groups, but they present rather different human rights issues.
No, within the family.
Only within, okay.
Only within the family, yeah.
And so then I have just one other question. Did you code it all? I don't know if this is relevant in Chile. I know in many other places it would be relevant to look at migration status, citizenship status within those groups. Did you do that, or even racial status, perhaps?
Well, you know, actually in Chile, previous research focused on...
Bueno.
Who is
Say
that?
hi. This is my son.
Hola.
This is my son, Tadeo.
Tadeo, bienvenido.
Hola.
Can you say
Hola.
hi?
Hola.
Can you say hi?
Hola.
He doesn't want to. So, well, you know, actually, previous research in Chile focus on care arrangements. Well, has provided light regarding the role of immigrants. That is an issue. I didn't address that in this research, but it is actually. In other care arrangements, most of the caregivers are immigrant women, you know, from Peru, in our case, from Colombia, in our case. But yeah, it is, and in those arrangements, the intersection with racial issues are present. That is correct.
So, thank you, Dan. I wanted to ask a question also about the issue of, I think in your literature review, you said care was a human right. That is, the focus on care as a human right. And in your findings, you reported that both the caregivers reported that they understood themselves to have rights as well as the person they were caring for to have rights. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether you introduced the idea about human rights, asking them the question, or whether they, of their own, see caregiving as a human right, because I think it's a very interesting construction, and I'm just wondering whether it came from you or from them, and came from you or them in terms of themselves and in terms of their clients or patients or family members.
When I start the research, when I start my primary data collection, yeah, my guide of question put explicitly the idea of human rights. And that is super interesting because I think that Chile has a very critical, Chileans have a very critical thought regarding human rights based on the last decades. And because of that, the question, it wasn't so abstract, you know. Chileans people talk about human rights. So he talks about human rights. So,
del sistema solar y de los agujeros negros.
so,
So the other comment I just wanted to make was that I am delighted to hear that the director of Asociación Yo Cuido is
Cuido.
part of
Sí,
the
yo
writing of the
hago.
new constitution, because I
Yeah.
think it is an opportunity to bring that issue into a different status within the country. Having someone like that among the many people who will be writing the new constitution is an accomplishment.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it could
is.
be, but if we tie the two presentations together, it's always interesting to think about. Sometimes people achieve victories by getting things put into constitutions or defined as rights. But if you don't continue to work at the education and the activism piece, this can be a place where good ideas go to die, because then you can have a theoretical right with no ability to actually do anything with it. And in Colombia, for example, you're probably familiar. I mean, they have been very successful in opening up the courts and the constitution to many types of human rights claims, but they have not been successful at all in proceeding quickly or effectively with those claims, or really using that system to solve the underlying problem. So it can be a very mixed thing.
Yeah.
And I thought the two presentations were interesting in that way, not only because one is dealing with the early life, you know, issues, and others with the later life or disability issues, but
Yeah,
this
totally.
too is a connection.
So
Yeah.
I have two other comments, one from the chat and one from the questions. The chat wants to thank you and emphasize the importance of caregiving research, particularly vis-a-vis the aging in the US population and the importance of these issues here in the US. And the second comes from a participant who thanks you, both of you, for your presentations. And for you, Carlos, there's a question, and then another one actually for you, Alicia. The question for Carlos is a apology for having possibly missed something, but what was the range of time caregivers have been caregiving? That is, you said they had to have been caregiving at least 3 months, but was there a minimum or a maximum of the time they were
Well,
involved in caregiving?
Well, some of them, for instance, I remember like 3 or 4 cases, more than 14 years in the case of daughters or sons, you know, in the case of a grandmother who plays the role of the primary informal caregiver. Her grandson, Emilio, has, I think, if I remember correctly, 17 years old. So it is a lot.
A long time.
Yeah.
And congratulations to you, Carlos, from Javier. Alicia, the question for you is, do you have a favorite book other than your recommendation on police brutality for raising these issues with young children?
I have most of them displayed behind me. I have a list that I can share. Maybe I'll put in a chat. But I need to stress that in this project, I work mostly with white children. And if you have a different group of children, I would recommend different threads. Talking about racism with, let's say, Black children is a different issue. You talk about racism with white children. In this project, we prioritize talking about white privileges and talking about how you can engage in activism, right? But for Black children and other children of color, it's important for them to see, you know, pride and joy, so they don't just see themselves in terms of oppression.
Great. So maybe you can put them in the chat, and we thank you both for your contributions and congratulate you both on your research. And I will now turn our time together over to Dan.
Well, thank you. And in keeping with my previous comments, I have to confess that I now know more or less what I am going to do, but I am not entirely sure how I am supposed to do it. I guess my job is to present the certificates, and we usually do this in person. So, you know, I would normally be handing it to you, but I think I just read the names now of the people who are getting the certificates, and then Tim or Bonnie, I think, is going to facilitate the physical delivery of them. I'm not quite sure.
Yes,
Tim,
that's right. But
yeah.
each of them has a moment to say something after you announce they're getting
A
this.
brief on their paper. Yes, I see that. Okay, so let's start with Alicia Nguyen. The paper was entitled Protecting and Embracing the Child's Right to Play During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And as I think we learned before, Alicia is a PhD candidate, curriculum and instruction at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development. So Alicia, I turn it back to you for a brief moment.
Thank you, Professor Cantron. So when I wrote the paper for a human rights seminar, I thought about different issues. I thought I would write about the right to education. You know, it's why I write a tie directly to my field of research. But then I recognized that during the pandemic, we talk a lot about learning loss, but nobody talks about the importance of play. That's why I chose to write about the right to play and look at it in the context of the pandemic. Because we know that during the pandemic, we have school closures and shelter in place orders that kind of like limited children access to play areas like school playgrounds, like park or recreation centers. And in education, I think we talk a lot about learning loss, right? So most of the, it used to, we call the trickle down or the push down curriculum that we used to have a place-based learning practices in early childhood grades up until third grade. But because of state testing and accountability and everything else, then even the young children have to be prepared for test. And now during COVID, because of the fear of learning loss, all the remote learning practices are just about making sure that the children learning skills, right? Especially tech related skills. And they don't get chances to play even, but they find different ways to play. The children are really creative in that way. They find different ways to play, but the schools somehow try to suppress that. And I think it's important to look at it because this is just, you know, how the right to play has been seriously violated during this period.
Thank you. I actually think that's such an incredibly important insight. I mean, play is so essential to children in terms of learning how to be people and to socialize with other people and learning how to think and engage. And I mean, I think adults should have a right to play also, but that may be a bigger ask. Although there are things in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that indicate something on the nature of a right to leisure, and you know, it's not a frivolous thing at all. So thank you. And congratulations. Our next presentation is Amy Howard. Hello, Amy. It's good to see you again. Master's in Social Work, School of Social Work. The paper is entitled Centering the Voices of Indigenous Women in Healing and Justice.
Hi, everybody. So I just finished my social work program, and I'm interested in doing work that bridges mental health and human rights, and in particular, doing work that uplifts the voices of people with lived experience in mental health services, and also doing work to adopt practices that are more culturally sensitive. And so for my paper this semester, I studied domestic violence in Indigenous communities in the United States and the need for very specific healing and justice protocols in order to address this problem. And I made links between healing and justice and discussed how human rights and activism can be leveraged to bring attention to the issue of domestic violence and to build interconnection to counter practices that contribute to the harm of Indigenous women. That's it.
Excellent, thank you, and congratulations on completing the program and the paper and moving forward. Our next presenter is, there's Antonio Taiga Gutierrez. Hello, Taiga, it's good to see you again. I remember you from somewhere. I can't remember now how many years ago it's been. It was a while. In this COVID thing, everything before it seems like ancient history, but it's good to see you again. A dual degree student, Master of Social Works, Master of Arts in Theology and Ministry, and the paper is entitled The Holy See's Relationship to Human Rights as Church and State, a look at the Convention of the Rights of the Child and the sex abuse scandal. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Canstrom. For this seminar, I wrote my research paper on the Holy See's relationship to human rights. And specifically, I looked at the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Church's sex abuse scandals from an ecclesiastical perspective, or the institutional perspective of the Catholic Church. And so the UN made recommendations to both the Vatican City state laws, but also as well as to the canon law, or the regulations that govern institutional church, not just the nation state laws of Vatican City. So you might imagine that recommendations to how religious faith governs itself might be contentious, especially as it pertains to religious freedom. But what I aim to do in this paper was to look at the tradition and doctrine of the Catholic Church through aspects like Catholic social teaching and encyclicals such as Rerum Novarum, Gaudium et Spes, which may or may not mean anything to people, but these are important documents in the Catholic Church, which really push the vision to quote unquote read the signs of the times. So to impact the world, but also to be impacted by the world. And so I attempt to argue that from within the church, these recommendations and even the act of being critically analyzed to uphold rights from a body such as the UN is actually really in line with the Catholic Church's vision of itself and the laws that govern its religious institution. And so I know it's been a couple of years since I wrote that paper at this point, but I also just really wanted to take a quick moment to credit the seminar and the certificate program and setting the foundation to how I see myself and my role as a social worker and as a theologian. And I think, as a service provider in the everydayness of seeing clients, there can be this narrowness of notions of policies to just insurance policies. And that as a dual degree student, I knew I'd engage, social work and theology, but, I was also exposed to the richness of law and political analysis. And I think to really bring me back to the biopsychosocial and spiritual work towards justice and healing. And so for me, ultimately, the certificate program helped me to develop a disposition to really critically discern the justice needs of the other and kind of change the way I engage my clients and the migrants I work with in my research. So I just want to say thank you to everyone involved at the center and to help me in that formation. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I remember you well, and I remember the group of students who were in the seminar with you. It was an extraordinarily interesting group of people that year, and we had some very good discussions about that. And I do notice, and I'm now remembering talking with you a little bit about this at the time, that you do tend to often, and don't take this as an insult because I mean it as a compliment, you do tend to sort of drift sometimes into legal thinking and justice and law. So keep open the possibility of going to law school someday. You never know where life might take you. Thank you. It's very interesting work, very important work.
I thought he was going to thank you for your appreciation of the certificate and the seminar, which I will thank you for, given that he went to the law school recruit move.
No, I'm not recruiting. I'm just observing. But yes, thank you for that too. Much appreciated. Jane Hopkins Walsh, PhD candidate in the Connell School of Nursing and a board certified pediatric nurse practitioner, as I think you mentioned in your question or one of your comments today. The paper is entitled Injustice in Our Sugar Bowl. That's a great title, by the way. That's a very interesting way to start. Right to Health and the Role of the Nurse as an Agent for Global Social Justice. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Thank you so much. And I also, before I start, want to echo the previous comments and big thanks and gratitude to the Center for Human Rights. I, by chance, discovered you in my first year of my PhD program in 2017, and the engagement with the center, with your lunchtime seminars and educational sessions has really shifted my work and I think made me the scholar that I am today. So briefly, I'm a nurse. I have about a decade of work in Honduras and a life careers work accompanying migrant and immigrant and asylum seeking people here in the US as a nurse in primary care. And my paper examined this idea of missed care. And I've since written more about this, but I start with the idea of miscare, that the inability of low-income countries to allocate public health resources creates scenarios of miscare. And that miscare is further complicated when global financial investors and corporate interests create uneven power relationships And extreme poverty limits the options for families that need to work in order to eat. So I use Nicaragua as an example, and I discuss the case of young male sugarcane workers from 2 agricultural communities in coastal Nicaragua. And the conditions applied to Lower Honduras, where I'm also doing work, who are dying at epidemic rates from chronic kidney disease. And it's a condition known as Mesoamerican nephropathy syndrome, the cause of which is unknown. And it strikes young male agricultural workers, traditionally not those with later stage like diabetes and hypertension, which is also a known cause of kidney disease. So this is atypical. In 2008, a complaint was made on behalf of the sick and dying workers, and that arose from the activism of the community. And the complaint was made to the Office of the Compliance Advisor, the Ombudsman at the World Bank. And it stated that the activities of the Nicaraguan Sugar Estates Limited Corporation were responsible for the kidney disease and the related deaths in the community. And the complaint was substantiated, and an international plan was outlined for research into the cause of this illness, which just perhaps as circumstance came out of Boston University School of Public Health, Dr. Dan Brooks, who I connected with, and I'm continuing to do work in this area. So the case raises many human rights and ethical questions, including organizational ethics, corporate social responsibility, health as a human right, and the moral and legal duties of states and the global community to provide healthcare in low resource settings. The paper used a human rights framework and Paulo Freire's concept of concienciación to argue for the importance of nurses and other healthcare providers working to uncover the root causes of such problems and to act as agents for social change and justice.
Thank you. And thank you for the kind words about our program as well. For those of us who do this year after year, I really cannot express how inspiring it is to see people engaging in this work in the way that all of you have today. These issues in one sense are very different from each other, but what they share is a real commitment to human rights, broadly understood. Obviously, the very idea of human rights is a work in progress and a complicated thing. But I'm just personally, and I think I can speak for Brinton as well, although I'll invite her to weigh in, just so impressed with the quality of the research and the care that you put into these projects. And please consider yourselves to be members of our center going forward, affiliates, part of the ongoing project, because as you've all illustrated so well, there's so much work yet to be done in all of these fields, and we're committed to it. I know you're committed to it. So I thank you all for your engagement and for the work that you've done. And I wish you health and peace in the summer going forward. Brinton, did you want to add anything?
Well, I absolutely agree 100% with Dan. And I just would like to add one thing, which is that in a rather unusual coincidence or convergence of your all receiving your certificates now, I note that there's a preponderance of people who are in the education and caring fields. And I think it's a particular contribution that you can bring to these fields by focusing on your activism and on yoking your activism with your research, with your caretaking, because these are, I think, as Amy suggested, these are convergent interests that don't converge often enough in the preparation, and particularly the professional preparation of people in education and in mental health, psychosocial well-being. So I congratulate you for crafting ways of bringing these together in very important contributions. And thank you all for being with us, and thank all of you who participated and raised questions for being here. And we know you'll get your certificates mailed to you. We're sorry we can't hand them to you personally and offer you a nice lunch, but
yeah, we would have a drink. I mean, normally in a human event, we'd be mingling, we'd
Right.
be sharing some food and drink. Here's going to be a bit abrupt once we all leave the meeting, as they say. But I do, I never know what to say at this moment. The phrase "peace out" comes to my mind for some reason. But
there we go.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you all
everybody.
very much.